Here's my issue. My issue with everything Peter Dinklage has said with this whole situation about Snow White and the Seven Dwarves and the remake coming. It's Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. It's not Snow White and the seven normal-sized humans like every other movie.
She, a monster, covers 3 beds. Let's kill it before it wakes up. Which end do we kill? Shh, shh. Children.
This is a fairy tale, a remake of a fairy tale, pardon me. And this is also giving 7 dwarves, people, real life people, actors, a chance to star in a movie in a role that is fit for them, literally fit for them. I can't. When The Greatest Showman came out, I couldn't be the main lead. I couldn't be P.T. Barnum. I could have been one of the side acts because that role was made for me. And the issue at hand is, by saying this, he's doing something worse for the dwarf and the little people community. He's trying to take roles away. It really blows my mind. The whole woke thing, you're going too far, in my opinion. It's too far. It's too much. You're trying to change something that doesn't need to be changed. There was nothing wrong with how dwarves were portrayed. He wants to say these cave dwellers. That's wrong. First off, they lived in a cottage, they worked, and they had a whole lot of gems. So in reality, they were rich. Let's be honest here. In a fairy tale world, these guys were rich, and they all had separate characteristics that really taught and made themselves different from each other. They weren't just one being of dwarves. He had no issue, absolutely no issue, being cast as a dwarf in Elf when he was representing that whole situation. That paycheck cleared just fine. When he was in Game of Thrones, he had absolutely no issue in that role when it was casted for a dwarf. That paycheck cleared just fine. Now this all of a sudden is crazy? This needs to be changed for current culture? Come on now. Disney, reach out to me. I will take every dwarf role you want. It can be Snow White and 25 dwarves. I have 24 friends in the dwarf community that would do these roles. That's the issue here.
How do you do?
Knows the story of Snow White, a German fairy tale that was first published by the Brothers Grimm in 1812. At the center of the story is the protagonist, a girl named Snow White, and the story goes that Snow White's mother, while sitting by a window and sewing during the winter, pricked her finger, which caused a drop of blood to fall onto the fresh white snow, and the contrast of the red blood against the snow was so striking that she wished for a daughter with skin as white as the snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. And when Snow White was born, her skin was as white as snow, and this fulfilled her mother's wish. It was such a beautiful story, and I remember watching this when I was really little. My mom made me watch all the classics. Although I don't really remember much about the movie, one thing I did absolutely identify with is Snow White's innocence and the way she looked at the world. She was so amiable and friendly. There was a conflict between good and evil, jealousy, purity and kindness. It is so many things. Like I said, this almost feels as though she's dead and she's dreaming all of this, or the prince is basically like an allegory to an angel or somebody coming to take her soul away. She was so sweet, and she kind of reminds me of the girl from the movie All Dogs Go to Heaven. I absolutely love that movie.
Fine, thank you. Will you be in the race tonight?
This girl literally reminds me of Snow White. But anyway, in comes Disney with all their remakes and all their butt puckering to fix, I guess, yet another problematic movie that's relatable across all different types of cultures and people. And the first thing that was pretty odd that I noticed was who they cast as Snow White. And you know what? Even though we understand the reason why Disney might be doing that, I personally didn't have a problem with this girl because she does resemble Snow White. It didn't really matter to me what her background was as long as she can look like the character. And I think that for the most part, she looks like the character Snow White. She can definitely pull it off. Now what's hilarious is that every article is letting it rip, and many are curious as to what is actually going on with the controversy surrounding Snow White. Now at first glance, I wasn't really sure what was happening when I saw this picture floating around the internet, but what was very clear is that most of these people don't seem to be dwarves. Some of them might be short, but I don't think they are considered dwarves. I don't even understand what's going on here. Oh wait, there's a dwarf. And And honestly, this just looks like people LARPing somewhere in a field who came from a city and have no knowledge of the wilderness and the fact that they're all going to be covered up to the neck in ticks. One thing's for sure, they are not dwarves. So why have they gone this route? Why is the internet so mad? Let's go ask Peter Dinklage.
7 dwarves accusing the studio of double standards and calling on Disney to reassess the entire project.
Snow White, Peter called out the other damaging stereotypes seen elsewhere in the story as he spoke on Mark Maron's WTF podcast.
There's a lot of hypocrisy going on, I gotta say, from being somebody who's a little bit unique, front row seat to some...
Really? Like what? Like what do you see?
Well, it's really progressive to cast literally no offense to anything, but I was a little taken back by they're very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White.
Yeah.
But you're still telling the story of Snow White.
Yeah.
7 dwarves.
Sure.
So, take a step back and look at what you're doing there.
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me.
But
So on one hand, he's upset because they're changing a story that was supposed to be a German origin story, a folklore, European folklore, which is kind of strange how they're taking certain European folklore and, I guess, modernizing them by changing them to be not white European, which is pretty strange to me and head-scratching, because apparently changing the skin color of somebody who is of a lighter colored descent is modern, as if white people are obsolete and a thing of the past.
white people.
But it's pretty interesting that Peter Dinklage is talking about hypocrisy when he has an issue with dwarves playing the role as a dwarf, where he had no issue doing the same and making literally millions off it. Almost seems as though he's trying to get rid of the competition.
You in a little while, okay?
I didn't know you had elves working here.
That's suspicious.
Every other dwarf in the community would be so happy to get a role like this. The reality is many dwarves are not cast in movies because of some of their physical challenges, and to be completely blunt, most studios probably don't want to deal with it or cater to someone who is seen as having a disability in comparison with average-sized human beings.
Curse them. We hate them.
From what I've seen from a lot of dwarf actors, they pour their soul into their work. Some of the most iconic dwarves we've seen are Peter Dinklage, of course, Vern Troyer, who played Mini-Me in Austin Powers. Unfortunately, he died at age 49 in 2018, I think, and Tony Cox, just to name a very few. And there are more, of course, but it's not like dwarves are prevalent in Hollywood, and because things are already enough challenging for them, Peter Dinklage decided that he would make it even more challenging by essentially opting, under the guise of activism, to rob them of their roles. The same roles that he himself leveraged to become a millionaire. I can kinda understand the ire. Furthermore, what is the point of even casting these weird holiday homeless hippie amalgamation of a group in this movie? They're regular-sized people who have magical properties in a Snow White. I find it very interesting that studios try to be so progressive that they end up being straight up downright insulting. Apparently, it's too stereotypical to cast dwarves as dwarves, so let's just not cast them at all in the remake of a movie for which they were originally a huge part of the central focus. Seems legit to me. I swear, the people over at Disney are brain dead or something. And I honestly would hate to believe that Peter Dinklage was the deciding factor in why a multi-million-dollar corporation decided not to do something. It's almost like they're continuing on this pattern of this trend of listening to the very few and minuscule minority versus the overwhelming majority. Nobody had a problem with the original Snow White, and there didn't seem to be anything groundbreaking in terms of offensive jokes or offensive things in general in the old movie, even though that movie is so old. It's like from 1937. There were characters, and the dwarves were more than just dwarves, but you'd think that Disney would know that. But of course they don't, because all they care about is what's on the outside. Only race and what you identify as in terms of gender matters to them. It's as if they're ignoring the fact that people are, I don't know, more than just the exterior shells they inhabit. I swear it's almost like the company is being run by AI. This constant urge to overcorrect everything is only making matters worse. It's bad enough that Peter Dinklage came out and said this ignorant statement that drove a rift between the dwarf community and him, but Disney went through with just seemingly shelving the majority of dwarves, which proves that they don't really give a shit about the dwarf community or the representation and the diversity and inclusion that they claim to. I honestly don't really see high hopes for this movie anyway, mainly because every remake that has come out in the last few years seems to have eaten the cancer straight from out of the smog-infested sky on a summer's eve in Philadelphia. It's not like they care anyway. There's definitely another discussion to be had, which is what I mentioned earlier, and it's the erasure of certain peoples represented in the European folklore, you know, to replace them with other ethnicities. Granted, this happened in the past on the opposite end of the scale, but going all the way on the other side is definitely not the fix. And it's definitely not diversity and inclusion. It's retaliation. There's nothing modern about it. It's just vitriolic. Anyways, that's just my 2 cents. What do you guys think about this? I think it's very tone deaf for them to do something like this. If this is in fact the role that they're going with, I don't know, it just seems really insensitive almost, which is the irony of it. Be it far from Peter Dinklage to, you know, make his own movie or become a producer and then give roles specifically to members of the dwarf community, but he's already made his millions, so why should he care? Funny, he only voices this after he's done so. Interesting. Interesting.